as I said, we will get to some of the more substantive legacies of the French Revolution, but I just wanted to kick off with something a little bit lighthearted. I would be remiss if I did not shout out our friend Amber Frost's conception of the dirtbag left. If you are a regular viewer or fan of Chapo Trap House, you've probably heard this before. This is basically her defense of political vulgarity, right? So she makes the argument that vulgarity, the concept of vulgarity, can be used strategically by people on the left. And of course, we see one of the greatest examples of this during the French Revolution, when revolutionaries produced a slew of materials attacking the French monarchy, in particular Marie Antoinette. Amber, of course, includes this iconic image of Marie Antoinette hanging out with an ostrich dick. And of course, you can find lots of other extremely vulgar and tasteless materials against the French monarchy from this time period. And Amber writes in her article, let's see, one lesson of the French Revolution is that rudeness can be extremely politically useful. There are arguments to be made over who constitutes a valid target, but when crude obscenity is directed at figures of power, their prestige can be tarnished even in the eyes of the most reverent of subjects. So we love political vulgarity, especially when it comes to overthrowing the monarchy or getting rid of capitalists. And again, on a lighthearted note, I also wanted to bring up one other thing before we get into kind of the meat of the discussion. And this has to do with a recent sort of college campus controversy. So a couple weeks ago, I just happened to look in the news and I saw that Brandeis University was under fire a little bit because they released an oppressive language list, which included phrases such as picnic, killing it, rule of thumb, walk in. If you go through and read the article, it also included the term people of color because you're supposed to say BIPOC now. And, you know, truth be told, this list wasn't really that big of a deal. It was something the university released and, you know, I'm sure nobody's going to pay attention to it and they have no way of really enforcing it. But predictably, of course, conservatives kind of lost their minds and it became this minor internet scandal. But the thing that really stood out to me was the inclusion of the word picnic. And what Brandeis said about the inclusion of this word is this. So they said that the word picnic is often associated with lynchings of Black people in the United States, during which white spectators were said to have watched while eating, referring to them as picnics or other terms involving racial slurs against Black people. And I actually have heard this before. I think that it's a meme that sometimes circulates around social media. I was really racking my brain because I remember a character in a 90s or early 2000s teen movie said this, and I really can't remember what the movie is. I think it might be She's All That. If you happen to know, if this rings a bell, stick it in the comments because I would love to know. But in any case, the point is in popular culture and just in kind of our collective imaginary, I think this idea that picnic has racist roots has circulated for a while. Now, it's not true. Reuters recently released a kind of debunking of this myth. They quoted this guy, Dr. David Pilgrim, who is a historian of the symbols of the Jim Crow era. And what he said was this: the word picnic derives from the 17th century word pique-nique, a term used to describe a social gathering in which attendees each contributed with a portion of food or another useful item. That's true. You can, look back to the French texts at that time, and you can sort of see where the word pique-nique kind of germinated. But what the Reuters article doesn't mention is the word actually gained popularity in the wake of the French Revolution. So what happened was, no surprise, prior to the revolution, the public was banned from royal parks and gardens, the most famous of those, of course, being Versailles. And then, of course, once the monarchy is deposed, aka sent to the guillotine, and the rich aristocrats and other members of the nobility are driven out of France, these parks and gardens become open to the public. So you see working class people finally getting to go into the gardens and parks, enjoy them, and yes, gather there to eat food, aka have picnics. Now, how did the word catch on in the Anglophone world? Also because of the French Revolution. So when the French nobility had to flee for their lives from France, a bunch of them ended up in England, and they started, putting together these quote, picnic societies. So that's how the word kind of caught on in the Anglophone world. And I just want to say this, of course, of all of the things that we mentioned today, this is probably the least important thing to come out of the French Revolution. And the point here is not that the word picnic is inherently righteous or inherently radical. But I think that it is important to kind of look at the historical context out of which it arises, right? Because this is a world-shattering historical event. It's a world-class uprising against inequality and oppression. We, of course, will get into some of the other consequences of the French Revolution in a little bit. But I think it's really cool, actually, that in the wake of the revolution, the working class was able to finally enjoy public space, which had not been available to them prior to the revolution. And even, we might not have the word picnic if the rich aristocrats had not been driven out of France and had to take up residence in England and, start these so-called picnic societies. And I just want to mention, before we move on, and I promise we will in a little bit, I think that picnics as a concept really represent like leisure time, right? And a break from work. And they represent, a space where we can go and gather with our friends and family. And again, as I said, where we can enjoy public space, or what we might call the commons. And this is something that socialists are still fighting for today, right? More of that. I think when you think about the socialist slogan, bread and roses, right? A picnic literally represents both of those things in one fell swoop. So we here at Jacobin are very pro-picnic. And I do want to mention, this idea, or if we go back to this kind of myth or whatever, that picnics originated with, Southern lynchings in the Jim Crow era, even though that is, not true etymologically speaking, you can, of course, find these horrifying photographs from that time period where you see white crowds enjoying, food and drink while a lynching is taking place. So I don't want to discount, that unfortunate and gruesome history at all. But I think if there's one thing that I would want people to take away from today's episode, and also our talk with Slavoj Žižek, it's that we don't have to necessarily throw out the baby with the bathwater on certain things, whether that's the French Revolution or the Enlightenment, or something as, kind of low stakes as the term picnic even, because oftentimes these things do have a more radical interpretation or a more radical history. And like, we don't have to throw that by the wayside.
I gotta say, it is kind of funny hearing you say picnic. I got a kick out of hearing that.
Should we bring that back?
Maybe you'll be the one. But and it's also there are words out there that have, regardless of their origins, they have modern day connotations that are negative or associated with racism. I can't necessarily think of one off the top of my head, but those words are out there, and it's like picnic is not one of them. I'm sorry, it's not something that anyone except in the upper echelons of an ivory tower would know or think about as being problematic. So that's all I'll say on that. And with these things, I'm always like, is this really what the left wants to focus on? Really?